What's up, wrestling fans? Now that I've finished the documentary, before I get into a couple of little spoilers in a minute, so I'll give you the heads up. But we have really found out that the Netflix has left out a ton of the Vince McMahon childhood stories, which was some of the most interesting stuff in this documentary, and they left it out. So they didn't want to paint McMahon, Vince, as a big sympathetic character. They were very careful, so they trimmed out a little bit of that. Allegedly, there was a ton of stuff, which we were going to learn quite a bit about, maybe more of his childhood and abuse and, maybe stories from school and fights and, trials and tribulations, things that people can really relate to. And so this could be really this sort of comeback story, or what you can come from and go to and become. I've always said this about Vince, but instead what they did was you now have the negativity of the allegations and the things at the end and in the middle and sort of around this whole documentary. But then on top of that, they trimmed out quite a bit of this interesting stuff that Vince never has talked about before, but was talking about in this documentary. He wanted to talk about this stuff, finally, some of it, and put it out there, and none of that really is in there. There's the little hint of the Playboy interview about his mom and stuff like that, and there's some other things, but they really cut out a lot of stuff that really would maybe potentially humanize him a bit, or give you that sort of like Rocky story, that Vince kind of has or had, with a little bit of a mulled ending now. But they didn't just change the ending, since the ending has changed a bit recently here. They've also altered what they're really going to tell you, at the beginning of this documentary too. So many people have clarified it to me off the air and on Twitter and in emails, rather, and then listening to some other people talk about it. It has now become fully evident that they have left out a ton of interesting Vince McMahon stories and things. And I think if you watch all 6 episodes or 7, whatever it is, I don't even remember now, I do think that there's a little bit of value in there. I think earlier when I'd only seen the first 4 episodes, I talked about how most of this stuff we already knew and there's not a lot here. There's a little bit in there that's like, okay, that's something different, or that's cool, that's interesting. But they just don't go fully enough into it, and now we know why, But I'm going to give you my spoiler on what I think my favorite moment and what a theme of this documentary really could have been had they pieced it together a little bit better. And the documentary ends up kind of falling apart a little bit because it's not sure what it is because of the allegations and how this has ended. But in my opinion, the most valuable thing in the whole entire series is Vince McMahon's relationship with his children, based on, his growing up and his relationship with his father and what happened. Him always looking for that acceptance from his father, but also him not having his real father to begin life, and to be growing up in this poor, awful, abusive situation. So it's kind of like it could have been a story about Vince McMahon growing up in an abusive situation, not knowing who he really was, and then finding out that he had this father, but not getting the adulation or the acceptance from his father even, but having this sort of like rescued situation where his life took a whole different turn to this success and everything he got and everything he did. And then that could have turned into his relationship with his children and how they never fully really got that necessarily from their dad either. And the Shane McMahon's reaction at WrestleMania with The Undertaker and Vince McMahon hugging him and him kind of holding his dad and feeling like he got acceptance. They told a story there. That was very, I was like crying during that. That was very sad and like emotional to me. The relationship of a father and son was very, that was hard hitting to me. That relationship with the father and son, and even the relationship with all the kids, and the family. But they really could have told that story of, Vince McMahon's childhood and parents and how he was brought up to, this story about children and fathers and sons and acceptance and growing and all these things. So these little things are sprinkled in there, kind of, but they never were fully realized because you didn't know what to do. But ultimately, what the story ends up being is that life comes full circle. Vince McMahon started in a chaotic, abusive, detrimental, like inappropriate childhood. He was abused. He was beaten. He was mistreated. You know, he was dehumanized in many ways as a child. And then he found his real father, looked for acceptance from him. And then from that to becoming this guy that created a billion-dollar company, one of the most massively successful companies ever in America and the world, of entertainment, and just this juggernaut, to the last couple of years having to leave it and go away because of alleged abuse, dehumanizing, mistreatment. You know, all the things that he began his life having happened to him, he is accused of now performing that on somebody else and abusing people via his power. So I am not interested until all the facts come out in tearing somebody down. I look up to Vince my whole life. It's hard to it's hard to come out of that. I do think that it's unacceptable. A lot of the things that he's done, it's awful. It's terrible. And it was probably time to go. And it's time to, not let these type of things happen. But at the same time, it's hard to separate it. It's weird, or it's easy for me to separate it in many ways. The Vince McMahon I look up to versus, hey, this guy's a bad person, or this guy did bad things. It's hard in a way. So it's confusing. We don't really know what's going on. And this documentary was a bit confusing too. There were points where I chose to be invested in the family stories and that sort of thing, and look at the company that I've watched since I was 5 years old. Since WrestleMania 5, I've followed Vince McMahon, all the wrestling, all the wrestlers, and of course gone back to WrestleMania 1. So I've followed this company and Vince McMahon and everybody and everything about wrestling since I was a 5-year-old kid in 1988. Whatever that was. Now it's 2024. The late 80s, all the 90s, and all the 2000s till now. It's crazy to see what all the changes it went through and all the things they had to overcome and do and create, and the heights it went to. It's amazing, but it's disappointing to hear that they cut so much out of Vince McMahon's childhood and story and things that would potentially make him sympathetic. Because I don't need to be like love Vince at the end of the documentary. I don't need to hate Vince. I don't need to love him. I don't need none of that. I just want to know the truth. I want to know all the good stuff, and I want to know all the bad stuff. And I feel like we didn't really get quite all the bad stuff, and we really didn't get all the good stuff either. So we were left kind of with this middle-of-the-road situation. And I think that's a miss. But there are a lot of good little moments. I think episode 1 is probably one of the better episodes. And then I think episode 6 or 5 with the family one those are some of the better times in this documentary. But what I really did not like was just at the end where the producers of this, or the film, whoever, I don't even know who the fuck these people were, but they were coming in at the end like a bunch of dorks, like narrating and trying to drive their narrative at the end of the documentary. They had to come in themselves, the movie makers or the filmmakers or whoever they were. I don't even know who they were. And they had to be like dorkos and give their opinions of whatever and their little spin at the end. I thought that really tainted this and made it fucking stupid at the end. Much of it. So it should have been a story about how amazing Vince was. Should have been a story about how sympathetic he is and how awful his childhood was and what he came from. And then it should have been a story about father and son and children relationships. And it should have been a story about the WWE. And then it should have been a story about, the height of everything in the last 3 years. And then it should have been a story about how it all just came crashing down recently. And now who's Vince McMahon? Maybe we'll never know. only time will tell, and this story actually isn't over. But, you know what I mean? But, something like that. But instead, they sort of chose to safely steer the ship in a certain way. And so that's what I did not really appreciate. So, it was interesting. I think you could have made 2 episodes instead of 6 or 7. But if you were going to be honest and tell the story fully, honestly, the really bad stuff, the really good stuff, and maybe some other things, and not try to weasel in the narrative in a weird way, because it didn't work really to me, then this could have been, then you could have made it 10 episodes. There you go. Netflix, they cut so much out. What do you think? I'm Joe Cronin. Subscribe if you're brand new to the channel, because you don't want to miss my other takes on other crap, and you want to be subscribed with the other 70,000 people or so. And leave a comment down below. You leave a super thanks, you'll really make me erect. And leave a like. Share this everywhere, and we'll see you live soon. For more videos like this, make sure you comment, subscribe, and become a patron on patreon.com/JoeCroninShow, and follow me on Twitter at MetaWorldOnline.